Hey, welcome back to the FwooshCast. I am your host, Tony. I'm here with Nick. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am good. We've been off for a while.
I'm exhausted from watching Avengers.
Yeah, that is an exhausting one, but in a good way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's Avengers weekend here in the world of the Fwoosh and in the greater comic book world in general. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. We might get some other things in too if we have time. But it's good to be back, and thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about Avengers because nobody else in the world is talking about that this week, right?
Right. And we're probably the first people to talk about it, and we're the same. We've seen it too, ahead of everybody, I'm sure.
Right. So yeah, obviously most anticipated movie of the spring. I think that's safe to say, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Just from the top of your head, what do you take away, Nick?
Thoughts that come to mind instantly with this movie is that it's exhausting, as I said, but in a good way. The action just doesn't ever stop during this movie, which it gives it a little less time for things like character moments and whatnot. And some of the action scenes, I mean, I'm going to have to watch it several times on Blu-ray just to see everything that's going on. So it just doesn't quit. The pace is more like a really long. It has like an animated cartoon pace to it, if that makes sense. It's like it's got to hit its notes like every 2 minutes, and it certainly does. So there are a lot of great things that came with that. Like I said, it's not perfect, and as I was thinking through, because I'm the type of person that has to compartmentalize and list and rank and things like that, I definitely put it in the top 5 as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies go, but I don't think I liked it quite as much as the first one. And from kind of a story and a structure standpoint, I would probably also put it behind Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy, but that doesn't mean it's not a hoot. It's a lot of fun, and they're actually slowly getting all of those, I don't know, required characters for my Avengers membership put together. So that's cool.
Yeah. I'm right there with you on most of your general feedback on that. I'd rank it about where you did in terms of the other movies. It's definitely it's funny. It opens into we won't go into too many spoilers, I don't think, but it opens right at the top with a big action scene, and it's great. All the action stuff is done real well. It's dense, so like you said, you might have to watch it again to catch everything. But it's not like some of the action stuff you see where it's shot in such a way that you can't actually follow it.
Right.
It's dense in terms of the amount of things going on, but it's not dense in terms of the pictures. It moves very quickly, but it doesn't skip any moments, if that makes any sense. When I'm watching like a Michael Bay Transformers action sequence, I'm sort of lost. I'm like, whose arm is that? What's who's and while this has a lot going on and it moves real quick, it is very choreographed, like moment to moment. Like you can, it just like in the first one, the Battle of New York scene, especially that one great pan where it goes from character to character and they're sort of working as a team for the first time, really. There's a lot of that in this, but like turned up to 11.
Well, and no, you're right about that, because I guess I guess I was an easy mark for this, because I marked out a couple of times just seeing like you said, the whole team at the beginning when they just like pulled you right by your nose to that little camera ramp up, so you hit a little bit of slow motion as they're all jumping into the fray, and then it picks back up to normal frame rate. It's like it's like they're trying too hard with it, but at the same time it's like, oh my god, they just got me with that. I got chills from that.
Yeah. And it's great, and it's it's funny. It opened and I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're getting this obligatory Avengers kicking ass as a well-oiled team against a massive force. They're getting that set piece out of the way right at the beginning. That must mean there's going to be a lot of interesting character scenes, but that was not the case. They just kept going.
That's true, but at the same time, now that you say that, and it makes me think about it, the entire first movie they spent trying to become that functioning team, which they get to at the end. And with this one, they are that functioning team, but over the course of the movie, they're until the last act, they're breaking down again, pretty much through the whole movie. So it does kind of work in opposite fashion.
Yeah, no, it's great. And that in terms of the structure, I think you really hit it. Again, I don't think this is a huge spoiler, but the villains work on our heroes to try and undermine them and tear them apart. But you have to open with something like they do, where it's this the Avengers are sort of the champions of the world and sort of this kick-ass, well-oiled team. You have to start there so that you can make them start to fall apart. Right. They've got to be able to fall from something. So I think that was sort of important.
But then at the same time, during that last act, the last act was pretty much just one giant fight scene for the most part. But when they're finally all together, in the centralized location, I don't know how spoiler we should get, but when they're all fighting in that church area.
Spoiler alert! At the end of the movie, they're all fighting.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a church, so watch out. Okay. No, that was another point when it's like, oh my God, there they are. That's all of them. I can't believe this.
Yeah. But I would say, it's funny that going back to that first scene, I have personally never really understood the recent phenomena of Twitch or the thing that is a thing now where people watch videos of people playing video games.
Yeah.
It's a thing. That is a thing. And I never, I feel like, I guess I'm old. I don't know. It doesn't show. But I had this funny thing came to me as I was watching that first fight scene, and of course they're all comm linked into each other, and there's sort of Cap's calling off plays, and Widow's like, can someone get that bunker, blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of like a bunch of gamers sitting at their various homes with a headset and playing it's like they're playing a massive multiplayer battle game. And I was like,
"It's funny that you say that, because you're absolutely right. I did not even think of that.
I was like,
because I'm not an online gamer, so I didn't even think about that. But man, that's exactly right.
I was like, this must be the attraction of something like Twitch. If it's like a group of really good gamers to watch them. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if there's any Twitch game group that is as fun to watch as a Joss Whedon directed Avengers action scene, but
that's true.
I was like, that's, and also because there's parts of that scene that are CGI enhanced. It's all very well done, but you could still kind of tell there's a part where Thor is, I think, 100% animated.
Yeah.
So it kind of does have a video game quality, and then the fact that they're all sort of plugged in, and I don't know, it was kind of funny. That's the takeaway of this one, is that it is wall-to-wall action. And I mentioned that to a friend who hadn't seen it, and he was like, well, what do you think? I was like, well, it's wall-to-wall action. And he was like, well, is that good or bad? And I think that's a case of just, your mileage may vary, because it did not bother me.
I would say it's mostly good.
But. Yeah. But it does, it comes at the expense of, more character-driven narrative stuff. You can't have it all, right? You got to it's a zero-sum game if you're making it.
But that's the thing about this type of thing. If this is how we're going to treat the Avengers movies, I mean, because there's at least one more. I guess you would say two. I think it's really just going to be one long movie split into two movies. But if that's going to be treated as the tentpole action films, because it's hard to get into character development now when you've got so many people running around the place. I think that Marvel is probably going to continue to treat its cinematic universe as a whole cohesive entity, and if you don't take part in watching the, I guess I would say, supporting films, even though these supporting films are tentpole films as well. If you don't take part in those movies, then you're going to miss things that happen in other movies. And I think Marvel's just kind of saying, well, you better go watch it, because
Right.
we're not obviously not going to have time to walk
Right.
you through everything to get up to this point.
Right, right. And, stuff is still, I would say that I was discussing this with my wife because I dragged her to it.
Uh-huh.
Well, you didn't drag, she likes a good action movie.
Yeah.
She was, a little more missing, the narrative element than I was. But I said,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just kind of along the lines of what you're saying. Everything is still kind of of a standalone thing. I mean, they do try to make it like you can go see Avengers, Ultron.
Yeah, it
I've
has
never
a
seen
beginning
it.
and an end.
Right. But I do get the sort of, especially with the TV stuff, you kind of begin to get the feel that all of these things, whether it's the Avengers or the solo films or the or Agents of Shield or the Netflix stuff, that it's part of a big tapestry.
Yeah.
And when you think about the pacing of a film, you think about how the pacing of an individual film works, but it's almost like it's the pacing of a year of media, because it's
agree.
you're kind of like week to week with Agents of Shield. That moves at a certain sort of pace, a slower development, and then you hit Avengers, and like that is a huge, densely packed, and it's, I feel like they're starting to think of, pacing the entire story, all the movies, all the things, as opposed to one film. So in that sense, it's like, Winter Soldier or, Black Panther or whatever it is, might have much more time spent on character development and story.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes time for the Avengers film to come out, like, the point of that is that it's all the superheroes together, right? So you go all in on that, and you say, well, the character stuff is for the solo films. The Avengers is about a group of superheroes.
It's like the it's like the comic runs when they have like a 4-part mini series that is just like, well, we're not getting into any character backgrounds because this is the problem that's at hand, and this entire thing is going to be spent working with that. So you're going to be able to see these movies on their own or piecemeal, however you want, and you're going to be fine. But you're going to get a much richer experience by taking part in everything. And ultimately, they're making this stuff to make money. So if you're going to weave everything together, that's a hell of a way to get people to go see the other stuff too. So
yeah. And to pick up on your analogy with the comics, because I think it's a good one. I think you could think of the solo films as like a regular series, and the Avengers films are sort of like the event.
Yeah.
How because now we've been for a long time in the publishing world. Every year there's an event series. And I feel like the Avengers is the event story. So it's just and then the other stuff is the regular series. So anyway, it's interesting. I would say, obviously, some people are going to be a little more disappointed, going to want more story stuff, and there certainly were opportunities that they could have gone that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I would say is that they didn't do. There was nothing wrong there with Avengers 2. Now, some people might argue with me. There was, there's certainly some, suspension of disbelief moments. There's some compacted time situations in terms of plot stuff, but that's all, I think, within the realm of a big action movie like this. I don't think there was no glaring plot.
They kind of leave a lot of it as well. The internet. It's like, the internet.
And it was sort of like,
anything can happen out there on that internet, and you just take it and go.
And it was sort of like, when did Ultron have time to do all of this? And it was like, well, you sort of get the impression that many weeks have supposed to have been passed at some point, but obviously the movie's too short to really. Anyway, but I think all that is certainly within. There was nothing that didn't, at least that I can look back, 36 hours later, I didn't notice anything that was like, come on, that couldn't that couldn't be possible because
Right.
blah blah blah. There was no. There
Well,
was certainly
it's a
there's
goddamn comic book movie. At the
right,
end of the
right,
day.
and there's a sequence with Thor where Thor goes off for a minute and finds out some stuff and comes back, and I'm
Yeah.
betting there was some cut scenes. There was
Yeah,
probably
there has to be because
know.
I mean, I don't know. I would rather us talk about this with some point instead of
Right.
dancing around it. So if you have not seen the movie, it's going to get a little spoilery here. But I like Selvig as a character, and he felt forced in this one, which is too bad because I think you're right. I think that there was stuff that was probably cut that he had a lot more to do with. And same with Heimdall. It's
Right.
like you don't take having Idris Elba in your movie
Yeah.
lightly because he's a total badass. So it's like.
Right. Well, and
I needed a little more there.
yeah, and definitely they, that's I'm sure that's leading into
Ragnarok and everything.
So they do also a good job of continuing to weave. And if we ever go off on a tangent, we could talk about how they're. This is total. I'm totally going off on another place here, but Agents of Shield is really starting to lay in Civil War themes already, which is in a real interesting way, which is way ahead of time and kind of cool how they're making that all make sense in the world. But
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. But getting back to this movie, I would argue that they don't do anything wrong.
Right.
If you have any valid criticisms about it, it's just, I would have liked to have seen them go this way or explore this. But there's nothing. With the choices they made were executed great. It was the only thing you can really argue about is the choices they made. So there's
Right. And I think maybe a lot of that too. It feels like I think Joss Whedon. I don't know if he's just taking a break or if he's going to step away entirely. But this movie seems like the good place for him to do it. He's still at the top of his game, but. He's one of those guys that I think that if you let him get bored, bad things are going to happen. Right. And even when you're talking about movies at this scale and with this story and this amount of characters and everything, he's the type of guy that has to, I think, do something different. So I think this is probably a good spot for him to jump off, at least for a little while now, because he constructed and then deconstructed. So it,
And my understanding is the Russo brothers are taking over for the. And here's an interesting thing in terms of what we were talking
Which
about.
After Winter Soldier, I'm like, okay, bring him on.
But this will be an interesting thing down the road is that, obviously there are some new characters introduced in this film, notably Scarlet Witch and Vision. And they're obviously sticking around for the next Avengers films. And I thought, for a second, it'll be neat in the next Avengers film if they can take a little more time now that we've introduced these characters to have some more character work and story stuff about them. And then I realized that the next Avengers films are the Infinity Wars Part 1 and 2, and there's probably not going to be a ton of character stuff in there. So, I don't know, we'll see. But they certainly have the opportunity. The alternate route, and I haven't read a lot of reviews, but I'm just intuiting from, what people normally think and whether it be people outside the nerdiverse or within it. The other way that they could have taken this movie is it could have been you could have had Hawkeye be the protagonist, and this could have the whole conflict with Ultron could have been set in the context of minor spoiler alert here, but we learned that Clinton Barton has this full life and family and a lot of sort of ambivalence about his dangerous life and being away from his family. That could have been sort of the core of the film, and he could have been sort of the main character, and it could have been the whole thing could have been cast in the dye of how does it affect this man, and obviously with the other characters, but that could have been the through line. And there were some moments when it felt like it almost wanted to be that, but it never really. And talk about you mentioned Idris Elba, but talk about actors that you get for your movie that you waste. Linda Cardellini plays Clint Barton's wife, and it's like she's a fantastic actress. She's
Well, I
almost
remember
nothing to
seeing
do
it.
in this movie.
Yeah, when it was rumored that she was being thrown in this movie, I was like, who is she going to be? I mean,
Right.
I was thinking it was just going to be like a little pop in to set her up, kind of like Andy Serkis was
Hmm.
in this one. But that was definitely unexpected,
Right. Right.
for as far as her role goes. But I guess you never know. My feeling about these movies now is that any member of the Avengers is strong enough, in my opinion, if handled correctly, that they can support their own movies now. And
Yeah.
I mean
Hmm.
that for someone like Hawkeye, and
Hmm.
damn, Black Widow needs to have her own movie. I'm
Yeah.
kind of getting on that side of, Marvel, do it because people want to see it, and you need
Right.
to just grow a pair and do this because
Yeah.
even though I don't think I was quite into the whole relationship with her and Banner in this
Hmm.
one so much. I mean, I could see it, being something I'm into with a little bit more time to develop. But I don't know why I've never even thought of pairing the Black Widow and the Hulk together from a fighting perspective. But I actually really dug that in
Yeah.
this movie because I was so surprised by it.
Yeah, it works. And I think, that's one of the great things that I think I get the feeling that came out of the first movie sort of slightly unintentionally, but very organically.
Uh huh.
And they were like, "Hey, we weren't necessarily expecting this sort of dynamic, but let's go with it
Well,
and
and,
see
and,
what
and I think Mark Ruffalo is quickly becoming like one of my, if not my favorite actual, characters in this. And I mean, I've always loved the Hulk, but I've never been a huge Hulk guy, especially amongst the Avengers roster. I would have several that I would put ahead of him as far as my favorites go. But man, they've finally gotten their Hulk,
Mhm.
and their Bruce Banner, and
Mhm.
they're saying, well, we don't know about a Hulk solo movie because it's hard to do now, and there's some rights things with Universal, but come on, they can do it. Come on.
I think, well, I think in the greater scheme of things, their biggest issue now in terms of whether they do a Black Widow movie or a Hulk movie or whatever is just how many production slots, how many
Yeah.
movies can you put out in a year? And
Yeah.
they're right now they're sort of booked through 2019. I don't think
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just becomes, well, we can do a Hulk film, but that means no Inhumans film, or
Yeah.
it's like there's only, so yeah, who knows down the
Well,
road,
and,
but
and
certainly
these days it's like what's a solo movie
Yeah.
these days? Because I mean, Captain America, I mean Winter Soldier,
Yeah.
that was a Captain America Black Widow movie,
Right, and Falcon. Falcon as well.
and Falcon, yeah.
So yeah, no, and I was thinking about that for like Vision and Scarlet Witch too, thinking, well, maybe we won't have to wait.
Speaking of
for-
Vision, what did you think of the Vision?
Well, without knowing your thoughts, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think it was perfect.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of, if I had any trepidation for this film, it was how do they do Vision? Because obviously, Marvel Studios has proved that they know what they're doing, but beyond, even more specifically than that, they know what makes all these properties different. Like, I'm not
Right.
the first person to point this out, but what's kept them going through all these different movies is that, yeah, there's a difference between an Iron Man movie and a Captain America movie, and then Thor is a fantasy movie, and Guardians of the Galaxy is a space epic, and they're all superhero action films, but they all have a real different quality, tone. They live in different places, and that's makes them different enough and special enough that you can keep going one after the other or the other. Vision, as the character, is a real interesting thing because he's obviously in this, for lack of a better word, general superhero world, which for Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe means that it's tethered to our real world in a way
Right.
that like DC and stuff is not. But he is the most, unreal character. I mean, even Thor, who is so fantastical and sort of plays around in the magical realm, they ground that in, he is from another place, and
Right.
their science is magic, and whatever. It kind of makes its own rules. But Vision is from our world, and yet is so strange, than any of these other characters. So how do you for the movieverse, how are you going to handle that? How are you going to capture that character's voice in a way that meshes with everything else? And I think they nailed it. I mean, he doesn't have a ton to do, obviously, but I don't know. I was happy with it.
Yeah, I've got to say that number one, I enjoy Paul Bettany as an actor quite a lot. But man, he has had the slowest burn to pay off as far as these movies go, which is fine because it's great when he finally shows up. If anything, got me. It took me a little while to get used to just how human they made him. The eyes, I mean, because you're looking at Paul Bettany. I mean, there's no bones about it. So he was almost a little too real for me at first, but then I was thinking, well, damn it, he's earned it, number one. and also, it's like, I think I like it because, they did it was quick, and unless you know it, you wouldn't have seen it. But I mean, they do the nod to him and Wanda a little bit, and that's going to help make that more believable when it's eventually going to have to happen.
And I will say, minor spoiler alert. Obviously, there have been some images of the Vision put out, ahead of the film, but in the movie on camera, he is different, and I don't mean that I don't mean the design or anything, but he, like you said, is not very robotic. He is. I mean, he's definitely CGI'd, and he's got artificial elements and skin and stuff, but he is very human with his eyes and stuff, and which I think is right. I mean, that's the Vision's whole deal in the comic books is he's a synthezoid, right? He's an artificial life form, but he is completely, real in the sense that he's, he has flesh and feelings, and he's human enough to marry a human woman, and so that is going to be kind of cool. And they also, if you were wondering, they do establish his phasing powers, although they don't speak about it. It's not mentioned or explained, but they do show him doing it. So,
well, I think, and now we're really heading into spoiler territory. So this is your last chance. Stop now if you haven't seen it. But I think that's all going to be able to just be taken for what it is, since he has one of the Infinity Stones right there, in his forehead. Which I'm excited about that, but at the same time, it worries me for him.
Right. Well, I mean, I think he could probably survive
his consciousness. I guess I guess that's what we're going to call it now. The Jarvis, consciousness will survive, but it's like, you're gonna get torn to shit.
I hope not, but we'll find out. I guess. I guess they speak a little bit about how he is created, and it's real. It's not quite midichlorians, but it's very plays a little fast and loose. But the idea is that they've bonded vibranium to synthetic flesh at like the cellular or atomic level. So I guess the idea is that he has complete the ability to control his own mass at the atomic level. I guess so. That would make
be pretty damn indestructible.
So I guess that would sort of explain the phasing stuff. But
it was interesting how they it was like by the end of the movie, it was kind of an episode of My Two Dads, because they flat out gave obviously Tony Stark and Ultron, I guess, creator credits for the Vision, but kind of in a different way than it's established in the comics, I guess.
Right. I mean, it's in the obviously in the comics it's very different. Before the several retcons, it's the android Human Torch's body with Wonder Man's brain patterns, and when he wakes up, he says, it's Wonder Man's brain patterns, but it's something new. I'm not Simon Williams. I'm not the Human Torch. I'm something new, and that's kind of what they do here, although it's different players. It's the same idea where this went into him and this went into him, but he is the Vision. He's an original.
Well, and that's what this movie. They took a very pointed stance on how they were going to handle the AI or the
Mm-hmm.
the robotics or whatever you want to call it in this movie, not only with Vision but also with Ultron, because I would like to talk to you about your thoughts as far as Ultron as an enemy and as a character. But when Ultron is speaking, it's you're not hearing from a robot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's James Spader, and it's if you have a lot of history with James Spader, I guess as apparently I do, it took a little while to
Right.
get used to that. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this was like Ultron was freaking cocky, smug James Spader, man.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's going to be. It's a. I mean, let's face it. We've never heard Ultron before because
Right.
it's on a comic book. But I think the idea is you think of more of a Cobra Commander type voice. Sort of a screechy, metallic.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's much more human than that. But the idea that what made Ultron great originally in the comics, I think, is there had been the idea in the past of the robotic AI becoming an enemy because it's not human. Like let's think of HAL in 2001, or many other times where there's been or Daleks in Doctor Who. They are going to destroy humanity because they
Right.
are, And the great thing about Ultron was he was never like that, even in the comics. Because he was based on Henry Pym's own brain patterns or whatever. He had emotions and passions that drove him, but he did not have the ballast of humanity. So it was, it was sort of like, what if you took all these passions and emotions that drive us as people, but subtract the humanity? Then what have you got? Oh my, holy cow! So I think that those underpinnings are there. That's the idea with this Ultron, and they do kind of hint at some interesting parallels with Tony Stark, because obviously the Robert Downey Tony Stark is very cocksure and egotistical and this and that, and there's a couple of lines where they say describing Ultron, and they say, well, where do you think he got that from?
Right.
Because it is Stark's creation, so it kind of makes it kind of makes sense. And it also the Tony Stark is having to deal with the idea that he's screwed up because he's created this thing he meant to do well, but he was too cocky, and he created and the fact that it is almost his id. It dramaturgically, I guess you could say it's an interesting counterpoint, because it is Tony Stark gone out of control,
right? What do you think of Ultron as a villain as far as this cinematic universe goes?
I liked it. I think I guarantee some longtime fans will think that he had too many corny lines or was too underplayed or too funny or something, but I was fine with it. I thought it worked.
It's hard following up Loki, but I think they did a
well,
good job.
that's true. And anytime you've got a fully CGI'd character like that, especially one that doesn't have a human face, and I'm thinking, and not even necessarily CGI, but think back to the first Spider-Man movie with the Green Goblin. That was really a mess whenever he had the full mask on, because it's just real tough in a movie to have a character that doesn't have a face. It really is challenging. And so, Ultron obviously has a face, but it's not a human one, and it's completely CGI. So James Spader's got to do a lot with the voice. And actually, if you went for a more conventional sort of robotic sounding acting kind of Ultron, I don't know if it works, just simply because there's you don't have the physical character to supporting it. It really takes the voice acting to carry it. So yeah, that's my thought.
I thought overall they did a really, really good job with him. And it was, even though we were dealing with extremely high tech, you know, and almost futuristic problems, or very, you know, very present problems. This was an Earth movie. You know, they're taking Loki out of it, and with everything else that's kind of going on, you know, with Guardians of the Galaxy and whatnot. This did isolate the struggle to Earth. You know, in this one, unlike in the last one, even though, you know, New York City was barely there in this one. They went more global, but they kept it, you know, confined to Earth for the most part. So he was a good he was a good character, tool, whatever you want to call him, for dealing with that type of Avengers issue, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Plus, you know, it's a machine pointing out your most human flaws amongst a team of people. So there's that classic, you know, element to it. So
right, yeah. You know, speaking of the actual conflict, the physical conflict, I do feel like Joss Whedon somehow does a pretty good job of threading the needle in terms of, you've got to have a conflict that rises to the level of, you know, Avengers. You know, to fight a foe that no single hero can withstand.
Right.
It's got to be, you know, Earth level, something that threatens the Earth. It's got to be that level. But on the other hand, you know, how do you avoid the sort of disaster porn that is so prevalent now in so many movies? And, you know, I know there's a lot of people that get really shrill and stuff about, all this destruction. Well, I don't know if I'm so far on the spectrum that, you know, I don't understand that things need to blow up and stuff. But it does, you know, get kind of tiresome. I mean, Man of Steel is the great example of this, right? I mean, where it's like, boy, thanks for saving our city? Question mark. You know what I mean?
We'll just go live in another city.
Right,
now.
right. But you know, you get shots where it's just things blowing up for no reason. You know, just sort of obligatory, and it's like, yeah, well, let's see, how many people must have been in that large skyscraper that are now dead.
I think they tried to touch that a little bit better with the development of Banner later on in the movie, because I think he was probably taking personal stock for just about all of that when it was happening, you know, kind of in the middle act.
And they did a pretty good job. I mean, I think they did a pretty good job in the first one of that. It at least is definitely compared to other big superhero action movies. But they do, you know, again, a pretty good job in this one too, in terms of how they, you know, takes place in Sokovia, and Ultron is, I don't know, he's doing a big Earth-threatening thing, but and there's huge CGI destruction, but the city is evacuated. You know, it's about, you know, the big battle of the third act is mostly about trying to evacuate this city.
Yeah, and that's what most of the actual Avengers were doing.
Right. So I don't know. I appreciate that, because I do get a little weary of some of the disaster porn, and but on the other hand, I do understand that it has to be. You got to have a threat that's big enough for the Avengers.
Right.
I feel like that's another thing that Joss does a good job threading that needle.
Yeah.
Walking that line.
No, I agree. But, you know, at the same time, it's not just, you're right, it does have to be, you know, a threat level that is extremely high for, you know, the entire Avengers team to be dealing with it. But at the same time, you know, that style and kind of the way that they have to go with it, I mean, it's perpetuated by these massive comic book movies, but it's definitely not isolated to them, because we're at a point now, it's like, unless you just keep topping it, people are just not taken by it anymore, and that may say something about, you know, your audience or whatever. But there's, you know, a lot of people out there that are paying money to go see these movies, and these studios want these movies, and, you know, a lot of the people that go and see them, they want that, you know, action disaster porn that, you know, you're talking about. So while I don't have to have it every second, and certainly not on the scale that it was for this movie, for every single movie, from a marketing perspective, it's like it's how do you change course on that? It would take something pretty major and daring to help kind of point that in a different direction, and I don't think they're willing to take that kind of gamble on such a massive movie like this one.
Well, and I think it depends on the movie, because like we were, for example, within the Marvel stable, we were talking about how all these ones have different sort of feels. They're all slightly different genre. You have to take a movie like Winter Soldier.
Yeah, and
could have, with a different director, could have easily found ways to just shoehorn in, some massive buildings exploding.
That's a good example, because if you think about it, the last act of that movie had a huge action set piece. But you know what? Right. That's not even in my top 5 things that I remember the most for that movie.
Right. And it's this.
You don't just crash a helicarrier.
Yeah. And the huge things that crash and burn are things that don't exist in the real world at all, like even within our imagination. These huge helicarriers and the Triskelion. So you're obviously watching something that is complete, even though it looks very real, but we know this doesn't exist. Right. There are no innocent people. You can kind of assume that most of the Triskelion is empty. Most of the people that are dying are Hydra agents that are left, and some SHIELD agents who are combatants. It's even though it's a huge, like you say, denouement of destruction, but it is different than just Metropolis being leveled and millions of people obviously dying just without sort of any sort of commentary about it. So anyway, that's another thing.
Well, speaking of dying, and if you didn't listen to me before, stop listening right now.
Yeah, I know what you're about to say, and this is first big spoiler. Spoiler.
Well, there were a couple of things, because there are a couple of deaths, I think, that I feel like I need to I personally need to talk to someone about, to help exercise me, coming to terms with how they were handled. And the first one was Strucker. I mean, I don't think we got confirmation that he was dead, but doing Strucker like they did Strucker, especially with someone like Thomas Kretschmann, is that how you pronounce it? Whatever his last name is. Yeah. He's a fantastic actor, and he's like one of those guys that it's like, man, they've got to have some really cool plans for him, especially with what he could do for Civil War, and it's like, is that real? I hope that's not real.
Yeah. I did love when he's knocked out at the end of the first sequence, and he falls, and then the lens of his monocle falls out. Chink. Yeah, it was very good.
That was fantastic. But in terms of death goes, for characters, I guess that death would be considered small in comparison to the apparent death at the end of the movie, where we were just all getting introduced and starting to actually dig Quicksilver as a character, and apparently they kill him off.
Yeah, and I really thought, they're going to rush him back to SHIELD HQ, and they're going to say, amazingly, his enhanced metabolism is letting him heal quickly.
That's something, though, because they still... I think the window is still kind of open on that, because if you think about when... Was it Maria Hill that was describing Wanda and Pietro to Captain America? She eventually says, he's fast and she's weird. But why do they go through the whole point of talking about his metabolism over his speed when first introducing him? So,
but they definitely, there is a shot at the end with Hawkeye laying next to him on the the helicarrier lifeboat, and he is. I mean, he certainly looks dead.
He's looking dead.
He obviously does not appear at the end. I mean, they could, there could be an addendum. They could. It's not. Like you said, they haven't completely shut the door. They could, in the next film, they could say, he was real critical condition at the end, which is why you didn't see him in that final scene. but he did end up living. I don't know. It
Well,
would be a
they
stretch.
had the damn vision box sitting right there too. They could
I know. Well, and I thought that was going to be, because they introduced this idea of the synthetic skin at the very beginning because Hawkeye gets wounded and they use it to fix his wound. And I thought, well, yeah, there's some combination of that with Quicksilver's metabolism. They're gonna heal him. But the fact that they didn't get it into this movie, it would be weird if, it's 3 years later that we find out that he didn't die.
Right. Well, but there are a lot of movies to come out between now and then. But you're right. And I was talking to a friend of mine who he's very much into comics too, and he's like, well, they already pulled that stunt with Coulson and blah blah blah. I was like, that's true, and I agree with you there. But these are comic book movies.
Right. Yeah, I think with Coulson they did establish that he did actually die, and they brought him back.
Right.
If they were going to do something like this with Quicksilver, I think the idea would have to be that he didn't quite die, that they were able to save him.
And my thought on this is that if this is finality in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Quicksilver as a character, and he is dead and they have killed him, then the thing that you take from this that's going to be the most impactful is that this is a plot device / character thing for the Scarlet Witch to make this a big part of her entire motivation and how she is going to operate going forward. So you better not waste that and give her some time to come to grips to that. So she's going to need to be showing up in some of these other movies, because I mean that's a long time to wait for the next Avengers movie, and if they didn't have time to get to a lot of that stuff in this movie, there sure as hell isn't going to be time in the last two.
But it's a lot of I was talking to my wife again. I said, I was sort of disappointed that Quicksilver died, and she said it was sort of a great non-comics person point. She goes, "Well, that's a lot of characters. Somebody had to die."
It is a lot of characters, and I would be, and they were. I mean, I knew that Hawkeye was not in danger in this movie because I know he's already signed that. They already have him revved up for the next Captain America movie because Jeremy Renner talked about how he's in that. So they were really, grabbing you by the ear and saying, "Oh, we're gonna put a lot of Hawkeye character development, more than anybody else really, in this movie, and we're gonna show you how human he is, and he's got a family, so you better watch out because we're gonna make it look like he's gonna die at the end." Right.
Well, that was certainly, the other possible character. They certainly set that up. It was a little bit of a red herring, which, I totally get it. The way that Quicksilver died, and the how and the why and the story all makes sense.
It does.
The only thing is it's just so sad because it's such a great character, that they hardly got to use.
There is that definitely, and the thing that made it even more difficult for me to take was the very last scene of the movie where Cap and Black Widow are essentially putting together all of the new Avengers.
It's very much Avengers number 12,
right? And it's like, well, now you could realistically, and I think what is probably going to end up happening is having two functioning teams. So it's that there's room for these characters that way.
Yeah. It is interesting. So at the end, here's another big spoiler if you didn't forward before. So at the end, they essentially, Hulk, Thor, and Iron Man all kind of beg off,
and Hawkeye,
and Hawkeye, and Cap and Black Widow say, "All right, well, here's our new team," and the new team is the people you might guess: Scarlet Witch and the Vision, Falcon, and War Machine.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool now that the active roster of the Marvel Cinematic Avengers is 2 women, 2 black guys, an artificial being, and Chris Evans.
Yeah.
That's pretty good, right?
It's great. And my thing is that here's how I am with comics and comic book characters, is that I don't want other characters or new characters brought in to replace. I mean, to me, Captain America is Steve Rogers and it's Chris Evans, especially now in this Marvel Cinematic Universe. So if you're going to have him do something else or put him down for a little while, then do it with characters that are their own characters, and what they are going to be doing is going to be interesting. Don't replace Captain America. I do not want to see Anthony Mackie become the new Captain America. I want him to be a badass Falcon. You know, that's what I want. And if Cap's not going to be involved for a little while, that's fine. Have Falcon be, you know, he's got the same kind of ideals, and you know, a little bit. He's close to Captain America, obviously. So
I don't think we'll have
to. That character.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have to worry about that with the cinematic stuff, because I think that really only happens so much in the comics, because they've been going on for 75 years, and it's like, oh Jesus, what else do we do? You know, it's just like they're desperate to find something new to do. But the movies have so much stuff to work with still.
Because I mean, let's face it, the easiest thing to look at is like, oh, War Machine's he's taking the Iron Man. From at least a fighting standpoint place. But, you know, Rhodey is a completely different character than Tony Stark.
He's his own kind of... You know, and it's great, you know, they get... Rhodey gets a lot of cool character stuff. A lot, maybe.
As much as you could expect from a very supporting character in a movie.
More than you would expect. And it's kind of cool the way they set him up in counterpoint to the main Avengers. You know, in terms of his attitude about powers and fighting, and I don't know. It's kind of a cool. They definitely take some time to individualize him. I mean, obviously they have in the Iron Man movies as well. But this is the first time he's been in the mix with all of the Avengers, and they do a good job, you know, showing how he's different, how he's an individual.
Well, the team makeup that you spoke of, and the fact that these guys are, I mean, Rhodey's been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a while now, but. You know, where most of these guys are, they're the ones that don't have as much exposure. They're newer. Even the Avengers base that they're using, I mean, it went from the giant tower in the sky to, you know, a one-story place. From like a size or, you know, issue perspective, that was like, to me, it struck me as, you know, heavily or ham-fistedly symbolic about that. But that doesn't make the issues that they could have this team deal with be not worthy of exploring in movies. You know, it's like, well, I want this, you know, 1.5 Avengers movie, you know, kind of in between the third one, or what? You know, I don't know.
Well, you know, obviously Falcon's going to play a big role in the next Captain America movie, right? So, well, you know, I don't know. Speaking of titles and what to expect from some of these movies, Winter Soldier is still one of my favorite Marvel movies, but really very little Winter Soldier. And that, you know, it was almost like part one of Winter Soldier, and so you know, I'm excited to see part two, where they finally do, you know, get Bucky back into the swing of things. But you know, we're going right into Civil War, so
you know, that's the one, like, I think, I don't want to say complaint, but the one thing that you can say about, you know, Cap 2 is that, oh, it's called the Winter Soldier, and it's like, you know, why is it called the Winter Soldier, really? You know, I forgive that, because it was such a great Captain America and Black Widow movie that they could have called it, you know, Cap's Adventure Through Candyland, and I would have been cool with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Was worth it. Totally agree. But then, you know, like you said, I want like the 1.5. I want the movie in between that one and Civil War. Yeah. You know, the one that really focuses on Bucky. Or maybe Civil War is a little bit more of a misnomer than we're being led to think.
Could be.
Who knows? I don't know. But,
well, I mean, it just makes all of us who have, you know, the history with the comics and everything. I mean, when you say Marvel Civil War, everybody automatically goes to, well, Cap and Iron Man. And that may be a little bit of a misdirection, because they didn't part on bad terms with this one, but you know, that doesn't something can't boil over between now and the next year.
Right, that should be interesting. Ant-Man is next. There was a longer full trailer before the Avengers that I saw. I'm assuming that you saw the same. yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be an interesting.
I know a lot of people aren't sold, but I'm in.
But you know,
Looks good.
a lot of people weren't sold before Guardians either. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I guess I could say that. I guess there hasn't been quite as much about this one and whatnot that I can say. Well, I guess I'm not really completely sold yet. But I mean, why would I bother? Because until this MCU really like gives me a reason to question, from a holistic or systemic standpoint, the choices that they're making, then I'm gonna go in with a positive attitude and give this movie, as much
Right,
go
right.
as I would the Avengers. So
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, hey, before we peace out, we I asked Nick ahead of time to think about what is his favorite from the comics, his favorite era / roster of the Avengers and why, and I have my own as well, and I'm curious now to hear to hear what it is. What is your? Because I mean, we're talking now more than 50 years of history, hundreds of characters, dozens of creators that have been involved, every kind of iteration of team that you can imagine. So, what's your favorite?
Well, it's hard to to me it's hard to ever be able to break away from the team or the era in which you were introduced to comics.
Yeah.
It's like that music that your parents listened to when you were a kid. You don't necessarily love it, but you can't ever like separate yourself from it.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
been with you forever. So obviously, the mid to late 80s, well, the late 80s, was when I came in. So, there was a lot of, West Coast Avengers was kind of the big thing at that point. And there was a lot of, I think George Perez was still doing a lot of the art for it then. So, I mean, how do you argue with, George Perez art
Yeah.
Avengers eras, but,
Yeah.
going back, I almost hate to say his name sometimes because he's so divisive, but kind of that Jim Shooter area of the late '70s. There were a lot of really great stories in there too,
Yeah.
with the Bride of Ultron stuff and whatnot.
mhm.
So that's really a good era. I haven't. I mean, I've gone back and I've read a good deal of the the '60s stuff. It doesn't speak to me the same way as kind of like the '60s Fantastic Four stuff goes, but kind of Avengers with me has always been about. I don't know. It's like I've kind of played in my own head a little bit more because it's I have a very specific team for the Avengers that I really like to have, and it's a big team, and a lot of sometimes it's I don't think there could be any anachronism about it now because I think everybody's been on the same team as everybody else at some point, but I like the team that they've got going now in the cinematic universe. If Quicksilver is or was still a part of it, that's really my big strong Avengers foundation. I would probably add Warbird and Wonder Man to that lineup, and then I'd be pretty much good. Beast was always fun to have in the Avengers as well, but that's a different story. And the whole Pym and Wasp stuff, that's not really lining up for this. But I think they're doing a pretty good job with getting the characters that I need in the Avengers in the movies. So it's cool.
Yeah. I'm in a similar place. The really for me the late '70s into the early '80s is still kind of the definitive time of Avengers for me because you could say this about a lot of, or let's just say most or almost all Marvel properties. The stuff that Stan Lee sort of established in the '60s is still kind of the ground level DNA for a lot of these for a lot of these ideas.
Completely agree.
But it really a lot of times got really expanded and richly developed by someone else. And Avengers is a great example. He said, we're going to have a team, but the idea is that they're not always harmonious, and it is a group of disparate people with different personalities. They're going to have conflict.
It's cliche, but it's Marvel's perfect answer to the Justice League in a Marvel way.
Right, and it wasn't cliche. In
Right.
1963, it was original.
Right.
And so that that central idea, that seminal piece of DNA is all Stan and Jack,
Right.
but it really wasn't until the Bronze Age that really got explored, in really interesting and developed ways. And I think really the Roy Thomas
Mm-hmm.
and in and out of Jim Shooter,
Yeah.
George Perez, that era, that was when you really started to take that and do it. And part of it was that the Bronze Age generally sort of expanded on that those Silver Age ideas. But that to me is, even though there's been some great stuff since as well, I've always loved Kurt Busiek's take on stuff, and Avengers Forever is such a godsend. Did you ever read Avengers Forever, the miniseries?
Oh,
yeah, it was sort of like, thank you for fixing everything.
Well, I mean, that was they got the Avengers got smashed by the '90s by just like a lot of teams were. But it was like if any team was having, if any Marvel team struggled with what the '90s were, I think it the Avengers and the Fantastic Four were the two teams that were just like
yeah. But that I feel like that late '70s, early '80s is a real sweet spot, because you've got you've got Cap and Iron Man, Thor's in and out, but Pym and the Wasp have always been a real central access to me for the team. It's partly because they're founding members, but they're kind of the only founding members that have never really had a standalone profile in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Like Cap and Thor and Hulk and Iron Man are all notable superhero characters on their own, but Henry Pym and the Wasp,
they're like the Martian Manhunters of the
kind of. I mean,
they say that because I love
right. Their identity is really caught up with being a part of the Avengers, and I'm sure that someone out there can dig down and actually prove this, but I would stake money that through every Avengers story continuity from 1963 on, thousands of issues of different comics, I would stake my life that Henry Pym has been part of the active roster longer or more often than any other character, probably more than Captain America, more than Iron Man. So I feel like those two have got to be on my Avengers team. And I really loved the Wonder Man Beast relationship, because it's something that we up until that point, the only other sort of hero buddies, if you will, that I can ever remember in comics before that, the closest thing would be like Green Lantern, Green Arrow.
Right.
But even that had was forged originally in that sort of hard traveling heroes where they were like addressing a lot of weighty issues and stuff, and that was great. It's one of my favorite comic arcs of all time. But there was something about Wonder Man and the Beast, the sort of joy of it, and the comic element of it. I don't know. It was really fresh. It's a great angle. I love having those guys on the team.
Yeah.
You got to have, in my view, Captain America. He's the definitive leader of the Avengers, and that feels like my definitive roster has got to have him. And Vision and Scarlet Witch. I mean, that's one of the great character stories, those two of all of comics. So that was pretty much the late '70s to early '80s Avengers, with a few other people rotating in and out. But Cap, Henry Pym, Wasp, Vision and Scarlet Witch, and Wonder Man and the Beast.
Well,
so,
and I will credit the Marvel Cinematic Universe just at a personal level for taking two characters like Hulk and Black Widow, which I guess Black Widow I've always considered a little bit more Avenger-y to my, but Hulk to me he's an Avenger. He's easily identified as such, but he's never been a required piece of my Avengers.
Well, I mean, for 40 years he wasn't. I mean, he was an Avenger for 2 issues,
right.
and then he was really never a member of the active roster again until the movies.
Right.
I think.
Right. So they've done a good job of bringing him in a meaningful way. When you're right, there's really very little basis for it to have even happened. But yeah, the whole mess that is Hank Pym, at least in the state of comics, and how it's going to, I guess, have to be addressed in the movies. I'm with you. That's probably one of the more disappointing things for me, because he's not going to that one little. He's been tagged as a character off of one thing that
Sure. Yeah. Well, but there's been a lot of great material. I to be fair, I haven't read most of the current stuff over the last few years, and I know he's been a lot more visible and used. So I can't really comment on that, like any Bendis stuff or whatnot. But yeah, for me, he's always been a quintessential Avengers character. So I'm looking forward to Ant-Man.
Well, and then we've been talking a lot about good stuff. It's been really, really positive. So I would be remiss without bringing up something that is kind of a thorn in both of our sides. That is not before we check out of here. But did you hear the latest Josh Trank story? The director of the Fantastic Four.
Well, the last thing that I heard about him was not necessarily related to Fantastic Four. So is that what you're talking about?
The being removed from the Star Wars movie.
Yes, but I didn't get the details. Just that he was slotted to direct one of the upcoming standalone Star Wars movies, and now is no longer doing so.
So he was supposed. So there's what are they calling it? Rogue One. The standalone Star Wars movie that's going to deal with it's a fantastic idea. I love what they came up for that. It's the movie about getting the actual Death Star plans before
interesting. I didn't. I had
episode 4, but that's the first standalone movie, and so they were going to bring.
We get to see some Bothans then.
Yeah. So they were going to bring Trank on to do the second one, but then he was. Conspicuously absent from Star Wars Celebration last month. And then he came out and said, for personal reasons, I'm, leaving the Star Wars movie. But now it's really coming to light that it was not his decision to be removed from the Star Wars movie, and it is being blamed on the studio's nervousness over his behavior during the shoot of the Fantastic Four and the current state of that movie, which apparently has had reshoots with a couple of the writers on that movie as recent as 2 weeks ago.
Oh, boy,
so
boy.
Star Wars, you're benefiting from the fact that I'm going to get kicked in the nuts again over a Fantastic Four movie. But
trailer doesn't look so bad.
Well, it looks like it looks. I mean, here it looks like a run-of-the-mill action movie. It still does not look anything like a Fantastic Four movie.
It looks like an ultimate Fantastic Four movie, I guess. I mean, I was not a big follower of the Ultimate Universe Fantastic Four comics, but from what I can gather, it sort of seems like if you were going to make a movie version of that comic, but like you say, I think that the key word there is run of the mill.
Yeah,
it does, at least from what we've been able to see, it seems very run of the mill. So I don't know.
So Disney's a big place, but it's also a small place. So one of their biggest properties that they own but should be able to own better is a mess due to apparently a director, so they're not going to allow him to play in their other large sandbox, which, by the way, another Star Wars thing. Did you see the latest cover of the newest Vanity Fair cover?
No.
It features both Han Solo and Chewbacca in a photo shoot with a couple of the new characters by Annie Leibovitz. So you need to do a quick Google image search for the latest cover of Vanity Fair with Star Wars, because it's just the way that Harrison Ford is sitting and posed in that. It's Star Wars.
Oh. Well,
Chewie looks a little different, but he looks.
A Google image search for Vanity Fair Star Wars cover returns a lot of Phantom Menace stuff from 1999.
I bet. Well, it's June 2015. Is the.
Oh, there it is.
You see it? Yeah.
The Empire reboots. I'll tell you what, I'm a big BB-8 fan already.
I'm a big fan of just about everything with that, and that was another great thing from the Avengers, is I saw that in an IMAX theater, and I will tell you, seeing the Star Wars trailer it's one of the very first shots from the trailer of when that new speeder is tearing across the desert, and then all of a sudden you see that wrecked Star Destroyer in the background. That image alone is awesome, but seeing it at that scale the other night, that was just like, ooh, I've got a little chill going.
Wait, so you got a Star Wars trailer before at your Avengers?
I did. It was the same one. It was the same one that they released online, but it was
right. I thought I was sure that I was going to get to see that, and it did not play at mine.
Did you see it? I wonder if it was like an IMAX exclusive.
Oh, it could have been. I saw it just on a regular screen, so it could have been.
Yeah. So BB or B88 or BB88, whatever it is. He's
BB-8,
he's going to be the next cool thing, and it was cool seeing that. So exciting.
Yeah.
And then we also, I guess we can finally talk about something Twitter related. I did see that Star Wars merchandise for The Force Awakens has I believe it's September 15th street date. So prepare for
see some stuff soon.
Yeah, the floodgates will apparently open with that, and there's a rumor I've heard that's going to everything's going to debut. They're going to have midnight openings of maybe the Disney stores for that stuff. I don't know yet, so we'll see.
We shall. I mean, we're starting to close in on San Diego Comic-Con, because is it mid-July this year?
It's actually early July this year. I think it's like that. It starts on the 9th.
Right. So
which I think that's the earliest ever.
2 months away.
We still haven't gotten any exclusives, Marvel or I guess Hasbro or Mattel. They haven't made any announcements yet. I guess Mattel's going to make their announcements this week, though. They kind of gave a teaser for that.
You don't know the Masters exclusive yet?
It's really only. I mean, unless they go very, 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 very in a direction that no one is expecting, it's pretty much isolated down to being one of maybe 3 things if they do one, and I think it's going to be a 2-pack. There are a couple of ones that would work, but maybe the characters are a little obscure. If I had to bet, not having any type of information on this kind of thing, I would say that I would bet on it being the Terror Claws Skeletor versus Flying Fist He-Man pack, just because it's Skeletor and He-Man, which are good characters for a convention exclusive. It helps round out their vintage figure promise.
Right.
So that's what I would guess that it would be, but I really have no idea what they're slotting for that spot.
We shall find out soon.
Yeah.
And when we do, we'll talk about it here for 20 or 30 minutes, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we are out of time, folks, so thanks for joining us. If you haven't seen Avengers, go see it. I give it a thumbs up.
Definitely.
We will be back here in 2 weeks. In the meantime, check us out on the boards. The FwooshCast is brought to you by thefwoosh.com. Find us on Facebook or Twitter. Let us know what you think. I'm sure someone out there saw this Avengers movie and hated it. So tell us where we're wrong.
Yeah.
Tell us why this is the worst comic book movie ever. But yeah, we look forward to getting your feedback and chatting with you on the internets. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Bye.
And play nice.